Welcome to the Redline Narratives Podcast. Today is Martin Luther King Day, so want to wish everyone a happy Martin Luther King Day. Really excited to get started today. I haven't been on here for a while, but we're going to get into why the Reverend matters, why that name matters. We're going to talk about everything from the Christian nationalism to the world effects, to what's going on with Renee. It's going to be a great podcast, but before we get into that, we'd like you to like and subscribe. And Engineer Marlon Solomon is about to get into it. So before we get into it, let me just real quick, at the Afro-American Academy, if you donate and like to the Afro-American Academy, you will be promoting our organization, which is a Boston-based nonprofit, which has work to do with everything from youth programming to workshops and learning about African American history here in Boston and the infrastructural history as well. You know, I'm an engineer, and it's going to be a great. We got a great series of events. Boston Redline 88 lasts a month. We're going to be doing everything from February 1st. Well, actually, we start next week. Let me just reply that. We're going to start next week with the People Before Highways podcast, and it's going to be 7 whole events. Every weekend, we got a tour or a workshop, so check us out. We got an early bird special. We got a raffle in case you're looking to maybe get lucky. You and a friend, $25 gift card. You can't go wrong. And of course, we got our merch. I'm actually wearing our BRL 88 Dorchester with the white stadium. Check it out, y'all. It's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of y'all this year at our 4th annual BRL 88 Boston Redline 88 event series. So let me get back to, yes. So we're going to talk about why does the Reverend matter? Now, this is something actually very personal to me. I've been for many years talking about narratives and why it's important that we maintain some narratives, because as I say all the time, when history's been erased, what did they erase? Because that's the whole point of erasure. We don't know, right? So some of the norms, some of the traditions, some of the things that have naturally occurred in the African American community would not happen. I mean, did not flow the way they were supposed to, because of course the interference, right? And you see, but there's some history that cannot be erased, right? Something like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And that name means something, right? Everybody, I mean, I've been to so many events. In fact, I was just on an event for Martin Luther King Day. It was a Zoom event. And a lot of my Hyde Parkers, hey, shout out to Hyde Park, Massachusetts. They were on there as a community building event. Shout out to Marcia and Wyatt for hosting a great event. Loads of people were there. And even they were saying Dr. Martin Luther King and omitting the word Reverend. Now, it sounds like just a word, and I get it. I mean, it's just a word. I mean, whether you say Dr. Martin Luther King or Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But the studies, the work that I've done, I'm convinced that this is part of that equation of what we don't know. We don't know that we should be saying the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King as a sign of respect for him and his mission to his faith, all right? Full disclosure, I am a Christian, but I'm more spiritual now. Like, I'm not going to church as much. Maybe I should. But the reason why I really don't is because there's a lot of white supremacy built into the church, the building, the statues, you name it. And it just puts me off. I want something, and that's my personal opinion. I mean, that's my personal preference. But going back to why it's so important to add the Reverend is because It was his mission. It was literally why he was put here, right? That's according to him. It's not my word, right? And we are dealing right now with an issue in the United States with far-right conservatives, right? Which MAGA, right? The Trump regime, and they're literally trying to impose a Sharia law on us. I'm going to use a lot of Islamic references because everybody kind of knows those buzzwords, and I'll go into a little bit more. But Sharia really is just that you're using God's law to govern, right, through the state. So it really blurs the line between the separation of church and state. So culturally speaking, that's what the abortion laws are about, right? Because it's their religion and they want to mandate it for everyone, despite what you do. And then, of course, they're defining who, even though they don't act very Christian, and we're going to get into that a little later, but this is why the word reverend does not fall into that narrative of that narrative in regards to the white Christian nationalists. Because if they're white Christian nationalists, the good guys, then how were they defeated by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Who was a Christian minister, right? So somebody had to be on the wrong side of this equation. And I think we know who. It's not the Reverend Doctor. So removing the word reverend comes across as a way to remove him from his mission and his faith, because that would mean that, well, I mean, obviously, he was successful in defeating the segregationists and the racists, and that means God was on his side. That's what the narrative says. And if God was on his side, then what side are they on? So you see, removing the reverend is a way of softening the impact. In fact, the civil rights movement was mostly a church movement. Churches were bombed, churches funded the meetings for the church apparatus. So to make it a civil rights movement, it's really it's not a powerful, and this is something that even the liberals do, because they have always removed God from everything, which say what's as it should. So you see, when you have history that cannot be erased, something as powerful as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the Civil Rights Movement, 3 Civil Rights Acts, then you have no choice but to soften it. When truth cannot be denied, it must be reframed. To dominate the narrative, right? It is edited. And that is what has happened to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. And it's important that we do this. And it's important for what we're dealing with today, because like I said, they're trying to do a Christian nation. They're trying to make this a Christian nationalist, white-only nation. So we have to address the religious entity. And I'm speaking on it not as a religious thing, but more as a cultural thing, because religion is an element, a serious artifact of culture. So he was a Christian minister, a moral philosopher, and by any historical measure, he is the founder of what we call the modern democracy. And in a moment when this country is so separated, it's not separated because there's both sides. There's no both sides. There's a side that believes in honesty, truth, and the teachings of Jesus, compassion, and all the rest. It doesn't. So this isn't a both sides thing. And let me be very clear. Notice I have not said Republican, because they are Republicans that believe in America, believe in truth and justice, right? And I can, like the John McCain's, the Charlie Baker's, the John Kasich's, the George W. Bush's of the world, These are traditional Republicans that have been pushed out of the Republican Party and so the Republican Party has basically been deep stated by these, what I call Confederate ideology, segregationist ideology group, right? A tribe of people mainly based in the South that truly do not believe in America. I like to always say what it's not. It's un-American. But what we should be saying is what it is, which is Confederate. So this black minister led his life able to change the world, and I believe to be the most influential Christian America has ever produced. Because when I say influential, I mean even just numbers. So, right? How many people were alive? Like, or what was the social media? Or what was the ability to get the words out? And remember, he used television to get the message out. So this is a very serious thing, and we must deal with it, because in order to solve this problem, and this is a holy war. Make no mistake about it. They've declared a holy war. They want to create a Christian nation, a white only Christian nation. They want to kick all the immigrants out. You see what's going on in Minneapolis. So if we don't properly define this as an intergenerational battle, a holy war, or remember this term, a jihad, which is another Islamic reference. And for all those, before you go, jihad, this narrative was co-opted during the 9/11 days, but doesn't mean what you think. It actually means a spiritual war, right? It means a spiritual battle or a struggle, okay? So this struggle could even be against alcoholism or, personal, faults that you're trying to get, it's January, so we just went through our New Year's resolutions. Those are holy wars. Those are struggles, internal struggles. But as a community, yes, it is a struggle, and people do co-opt it to mean holy war and actually battle, but it has a much broader meaning. So we must look at things that are being produced. If they're swayed too far, we won't be able to solve the problems that we're dealing with. We're going to deal with it as a cult. I've heard that word a lot. It's a cult. MAGA is a cult. Yes, but when you think of it as an intergenerational cult, the Nazis were a cult, right? It wasn't like, multiple generations, right? This was just, not diminishing it. Of course, it was, disastrous, horrific tragedy beyond measure, but it was still within its time. We're talking about intergenerational, multiple generations, going back centuries of beliefs and traditions that have been ingrained. And remember, this religion has always been twisted to defend slavery, to defend segregation, and now to defend what's going on now. So we're going to get into all that and a whole lot more. But before we get started, if I can ask you to share to like and subscribe to Afro-American TV, which is a subsidiary of the Afro-American Academy and Afro-American Culture Initiative. It's a Boston-based nonprofit. Your like is going to support youth programming, workshops, more research and development of African-American history, and infrastructural history. Let's not forget, I'm an engineer. And let's get to the first clip. All right. So, first clip, we're going to hear from the Reverend Dr. himself, and this is cool, and I want to set the stage with his voice. It's a bit of a long clip, right? But I want to be very clear that this is about hearing his voice and having the faith in what he had the faith in. Now, if you do this, like I said, we're not trying to convince you of believing in what he believes. That's up to you. But that's why it's called faith, huh? It's because you actually have to make a leap of faith. But I have the faith that he knows what he's talking about. He did give his life and martyred himself for his beliefs, despite it all. And this was the moment where he said that really brought him to be in the presence of his creator.
They started doing some nasty things. They started making nasty telephone calls, and it came to the point that some days more than 40 telephone calls would come in, threatening my life, the life of my family, the life of my children. I took it for a while in a strong manner. But I never will forget one night very late. It was around midnight. And you can have some strange experiences at midnight. The telephone started ringing and I picked it up. On the other end was an ugly voice. That voice said to me in substance, we are tired of you and your mess now. And if you aren't out of this town in 3 days, we're gonna blow your brains out and blow up your house. I've heard these things before, but for some reason that night it got to me. I turned over and I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. I was frustrated, bewildered. And then I got up and went back to the kitchen and I started warming some coffee, thinking that coffee would give me a little relief. And then I started thinking about many things. I pulled back on the theology and philosophy that I had just studied in the universities, trying to give philosophical and theological reasons for the existence and the reality of sin and evil. But the answer didn't quite come there. I thought about a beautiful little daughter who had just been born about a month earlier. We have 4 children now, but we only had one then. She was, if I'd come in night after night and see that little gentle smile. And I sat at that table thinking about that little girl and thinking of her from any minute. And I started thinking about a dedicated, devoted and loyal wife who was over there asleep. Taken from me, I could be taken from her. And I got to the point that I couldn't take it any longer. I was weak. And something said to me, you can't call on Daddy now. He's up in Atlanta 175 miles away. You can't even call on Mama now. You got to call on that something and that person that your daddy used to tell you about. That power that can make a way out of no way. I discovered then that religion had to become real to me, and I had to know God for myself. And I bowed down over that cup of coffee. I never will forget it. Oh, yes, I prayed a prayer, and I prayed out loud that night. I said, Lord, I'm down here trying to do what's right. I think I'm right. I think the cause that we represent is right. Lord, I must confess that I'm weak now. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage. And I can't let the people see me like this, because if they see me weak and losing my courage, they will begin to get weak. It seemed at that moment that I could hear an inner voice saying to me, Martin Luther, stand up for justice. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world. I tell you, I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus saying, still to fight on. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. No, never alone. No, never alone. Promise never to leave me. Never to leave me alone. I'm going on in believing in him.
Yes, sir. The words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I mean, when I hear that, I always get completely it's so powerful, right? And, the story of him, that his experience where he's in the kitchen and he's worried about his family. He's worried about his daughter that is just, like he said, a month earlier born. And he's worried for her life and the life of his family. And he's getting scared, as anybody would. And I think it speaks to his faith that he continued despite all this, and he gave his life for it. So, as well, of course, in honor of the Reverend Doctor and his faith, because I feel, like I said, we must center in his legacy as he centered his faith in his life. So I'm very excited about that one. It just got me going already, right? And on this Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day, we've got to start valuing it, because it is not guaranteed that it's going to be here. Clip from Daily Show. Quick reminder, all these clips are available on the African American TV YouTube channel. It's a video library where a lot of these clips and a lot of these things are there. We have playlists. Check out our playlist. We have the multicultural playlist, the Confederate culture playlist, and this one is on the African American, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King clip is on the African Diaspora Civics, History and Civics playlist. So a lot of educational content on there. Subscribe and like I said, and let's get into this clip, and I'll come around on the other. So as you can see, this is, it's not guaranteed that we'll continue to have the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day. They're removing history. They're not practicing it in the federal government today. It's like, all observances have been removed. I mean, it goes to, I guess you want to say, why is it so, of all the other things that have been marginalized for centuries, what is it that still makes the vitriol, still needs to be suppressed? Why is it so important to continue to bring down the African American history, right? And it's because culturally, when you look back at American history, the reason why you have to remove it is because African American history has like a secret unlock to the real narrative, right? It basically removes the exceptionalism out of the whole sweet narrative that America is taught, right? How exceptional can you be if you're being so hypocritical on one hand to say that, oh, we're founding a country based on freedom and we are fighting tyranny while you're being tyrants to a major part of your population based on no other reason except for race, right? If you think of all the energy that has been exerted to prop up this false narrative, in fact, I wouldn't even say false narrative is worse than that. It's more of a delusion. Like where everything from eugenics. Remember, they came up, they're doctors that went to school and measured heads and wrote major books about how inferior African Americans were. And if the narrative, and you're trying to reinforce this false narrative, lying to yourselves, even if you think about how today we have a lot of video and stuff, there was no video back then. So if what happened in January 6th happened in 18 whatever, we just have to believe the narrative that prevailed. And they keep on pushing and pushing the narrative farther and farther from the truth until it's literally, even what we think is true, it's just got little tints of the truth, but it's true, but it's so far from the actual real what happened. Remember, January 6th was a walk in the park, right? All these things make it so that we actually believe a lie. Okay? So it's so important to make that distinction that's why he cannot be the reverend. He has to be just a civil rights leader trying to pass a law, not a man on a mission from God, sent by the God of Abraham to destroy the evil that had persisted in this America until that time. And like the thumbnail said, be the founder of American democracy. We're going to get into that a little later, so I'm not going to harp on that right now, okay? But it's so important, and I wanted to, before we go into a lot of the details on the cultural side, I wanted to really, one thing about Redline Narratives, I want to do it more often, but to be honest, it's so much going on. They're flooding the zone, like they said. It's just, I have to digest it and try to pick out the elements that make the broader story rather than give you guys a day-by-day blow. You've got CNN and all the rest of, independent media. Shout out to independent media that's doing a phenomenal job at covering what's going on. As you know, the narrative is so important that they are trying to affect what the media companies, the legacy media companies are saying. The narratives are out there, right? They're going after wokeism. Remember, that was the first thing. They have to make it so that even to say things as, that are DEI, right, which is really a remedy, a repair, a program designed to repair the harms done for 200 years, even as they shift narrative saying that as we repair the damage done by the Confederate ideology for centuries, now that we're repairing it, in order to repair it, we are discriminating against white people, right? And we're going to get into this white and black because in the end of the day, I teach culture. It's not about race, y'all. Surprise, right? It's about culture. So not all black people were subjected to racism of America, and not all white people oppressed others and dehumanized others with racism in America, okay? There are people in England, there are people in France, there are Nigerians, there are all sorts of different people. So you can be part of the same race, and of course not the same cultural heritage. But African-American heritage unlocks the narrative in such a profound way because it's the complete antithesis of what's going on. So I wanted to talk about what happened yesterday. And that is that China and Canada, right, are entering an agreement to sell EVs and culturals. Like, for instance, according to this agreement, Canadians can travel to China without a visa. That is, remember, China, this great authoritarian, communist, right? I'm going to do another show on the narratives behind China because China is not, I'm not going to say that there isn't issues because there's issues here. You can't say that, they're doing human rights abuses. Are you seeing what's going on in Minneapolis? But so they have a special thing, but at least we do know they're pretty closed society, right? They don't want people messing with their internal stability. So for them to open up their borders, visa, just go to China, buy a ticket, go to China without a visa, is seismic. And not only that, they're opening their markets. They will be selling Chinese electric vehicles. That's the main, I guess, one of the main components of this agreement in Canada, and they're opening up trade. But why I said I picked this very story was because Canada is literally, I mean, Trump always defines it. And I don't want to get any of my Canadian brothers and sisters back because I don't mean it. Culturally, they are the 51st state. They're not the 51st state. I understand. Trump has a way of identifying a real truth, but of course he goes about it the wrong way. And what I mean by that is that our economies are so interlinked because, in fact, the northern border of America, the Canadian-American border is the longest unguarded border in the world, right? Because they're so close, because they're, like I said, essentially our best friends, which means that, they're not the 51st state. I love saying it because it's popular to say. It's a narrative that rings true in this regard that, like, literally, like you don't need a visa to go to Canada, that sort of thing, right? And that's what's happening with China now. So you have a situation where our dearest ally literally linked to the hip to the United States of America. Excuse me. Literally linked to the United States of America, right? Is starting a new era. And there was something, and we'll talk about it on the other end, that the Prime Minister, Carney, on the left here, obviously, said at a meeting, and I want you to listen to it, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Your first visit to China as Prime Minister, and the first visit to China by a Canadian Prime Minister in more than 8 years. A healthy and stable China-Canada relationship serves the common interests of our two countries. It is also good for the peace, stability, and prosperity of the world.
The world has changed much since that last visit. And I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership
Wait for it.
Sets us up well for the new world order.
Every time he says it, I get chills. I hope you heard what he said. In preparation for the new world order. I'll say it again. I just chose this moment because it sounds so small, just some words, but that is seismic. Canada, our closest ally, is reaching out to China, and they're setting a whole new path. This is a huge blow to the United States. A tremendous blow, because now China's interests will be served right across the border in the 51st state. Okay? Kind of what's, going on with Greenland, NATO. Okay, even what we're talking about in the United States, when you look at what's happening internationally, anybody with two eyes should be able to see that we are entering a new world order with China at the center. I repeat, what this says is that America's closest ally, its closest ally. I don't care what, I know, the special relationship between the UK is supposed to be the closest. It's not, because we actually are so close, we share a border. Our closest ally, Canada, believes that it's in a strategic long-term interest to now set a new course with China, which in turn, it has not come to fruition, because it takes many years. This sets China to be the new world hegemon, taking America's place. And to say that this is an unforced era, like my Patriots were doing yesterday, but we won. That's the difference. The good guys still won. The Patriots were fumbling yesterday like crazy. But to say that them taking a long-term strategic view to put China in their markets and open up new markets and have this new relationship means that China is now the new head, the new world superpower. Well, at least the head superpower. We'll still be a superpower, but we'll be isolated. So I wanted to share that with you guys because that is how this will affect everyone. This is why I call the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, right, literally the most influential Christian because, see, America is the number one superpower, well, was the number one superpower. So the fact that he affected the world here affects everyone. That's why all the immigrants, I tell all the immigrant populations that I meet and I talk to, that without African Americans and the sacrifice that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King led, they couldn't be here, right? And we have some historical, a clip later that will shed more light on that. So I just wanted to be very clear to point this. If you think it's not going to affect you, we are on a war footing right now, okay? A complete war footing, okay? So we must change. It's no longer optional to say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if it's doctor or that. It does matter. Are we putting Boston University, which is where he got his doctorate degree from, PhD from? Are we putting that above his face in a war, in a holy war, where people are trying to implement white Christian nationalism, deport all the black and brown people, import South Africans, white South Africans, take over Greenland, destroy NATO, make our international number one competitor? We have literally given up our superpower, our number one superpower position. We are no longer the stable center, the beacon of hope, the platitudes that we like to lie to ourselves about. And it's because we thought that the African American plight was optional. Well, it wasn't happening to us, even though African Americans have been warning about what has happened to us, because we're the only ones that this is happening to. Immigrants, even black immigrants like Nigerians or people from Latin America come and go, oh, what's all this complaining about? Just making excuses. You got to work hard. You have no idea. You see what's happening in Minnesota? This is a flashpoint, nothing compared to what we have a clip in the end of just images, a montage of what it was like, because you see, that's why it's so important. There was no democracy before what the civil rights movement in the United States of America. Right? Is this democracy? We say it's fascism. We like to look at Nazism. Okay, let me not go off the tangent. We got more videos that really speak to this. All right? But let's go into this next clip where we'll start looking about the past and present and really look at it from that point of view.
This hour with a bit of a reminder of the history of the freedoms that we have come to take for granted, and now fear losing. Many of the freedoms that we enjoy today were not given to us. They're the outcomes of years, if not decades, of struggle. Our ancestors fought for our civil rights, our voting rights, our labor rights. They took on fearsome forces, people and institutions, including the government, who weren't just going to give up any measure of power to anyone. Take a closer look at American history, and you'll quickly realize that every measure of progress has been met with pushback from those in power, and the effort toward political, legal, and social justice has often been punctuated with moments of violence between the state and its citizenry. Federal forces are effectively occupying the city of Minneapolis from the shooting death of Renee Good by an ICE officer. The federal government's response to this moment has not been to seek peace and reconciliation, understanding, or justice. It's been to demonize and vilify the victim and the entire system of resistance to an increasingly oppressive government. America's history of struggle stretches back centuries to conflicts between indigenous people and colonizers. Then through the era of slavery, when slave owners responded to slave rebellions by both black and white Americans with brutal crackdowns. Perhaps the most famous rebellion in U.S. history was the one that was led by Nat and his owner's family and led a short-lived revolt in 1831. Turner and others were caught, but the rebellion set off a fear and a panic that it might inspire others to do the same. In response, a cohort of soldiers, militiamen, and vigilantes killed more than 100 suspected rebels, and states passed new laws, including ones that restricted the rights of free and enslaved black people to gather in groups and to learn to read and write. In fact, fears of civilian rebellion against the state became central to the fuse that lit the Civil War itself in 1860. Long after slavery ended, government forces also tried to suppress the suffrage movement in the early 20th century. The woman you see in the photo on your screen is Lucy Burns. She was part of a group of women suffragists known as the Silent Sentinels. In 1917, they regularly picketed in front of the White House to demand that Congress enshrine women's rights into the Constitution, including their right to. Throughout much of that year, they were arrested and rearrested by police and locked up in a prison in Virginia called Occoquan Workhouse. In an affidavit, Minnie Key and other suffragists taken to Occoquan Workhouse described the prison like this, quote, "The dungeon I was in was very filthy, tobacco spit on the floor, all along the side of the filthy bunk, dirty horse blankets, open, dirty toilet, no water, dark and damp." Burns and Key were imprisoned there on what came to be known the Night of Terror. On November 14th, 1917, prison guards were ordered to attack the women to teach them a lesson. The women were beaten with clubs. They were dragged. They were choked. They were kicked. They were handcuffed to bars in torturous positions all night. After suffrage, which resulted in the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, the labor rights movement had its own violent history. In the mid-1930s, the labor movement was on an upswing. The National Labor Relations Act had just been signed in 1935, giving workers the right to organize. In early 1937, steel workers won a significant victory. The U.S. Steel, one of the biggest companies in America at the time, had just signed a union contract, agreeing to a minimum wage, a 40-hour work week, better safety standards, and more. But smaller steel companies, collectively known as Little Steel, didn't want to give in to those demands. So on Memorial Day 1937, steel workers from across the Midwest gathered in Chicago to strike against the Little Steel companies. The strike resulted in violence. Police officers, you'll see on your screen, attacked the protesters, those you see in white clothes in the footage. They beat them with clubs. They threw canisters of tear gas. They fired into the crowd. 10 people died of gunshot wounds. More than an early sign of business collaborating with government in its violence, we now know that the clubs and the tear gas that the police used in those images you just saw were purchased and given to the police by Republic Steel, one of the Little Steel companies that didn't want to give in to union demands. Imagine that. Private companies collaborating with the government to oppress the people. Decades later, racial tensions arising from the civil rights movement would lead to one of America's darkest moments, Bloody Sunday. On March 7, 1965, the late Congressman John Lewis, who was only 25 years old, he was an activist at the time, he aimed to lead hundreds of marchers from Selma, Alabama, across the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
So I look like democracy.
They were met by law enforcement determined to stop them. They were given a warning, quote, "It would be detrimental to your safety to continue this march," end quote. The marchers were not ones to be intimidated, and so law enforcement officers attacked them.
Isn't this what we're seeing in Minnesota?
Beat marchers to the ground, hitting them repeatedly with their clubs. Officers threw tear gas into the crowd, a common tactic that we still see law enforcement use today. Just a few years later, anti-Vietnam War protests would roil college campuses across the nation, including at Kent State University in Ohio. In May 1970, shortly after Richard Nixon announced that the United States had invaded Cambodia, students demonstrated on campus and around town. The state's conservative governor activated the National Guard, which only inflamed tensions further. It culminated with the Kent State Massacre. In a burst of violence, a group of 28 National Guardsmen patrolling a demonstration on campus opened fire into a crowd of protesters, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. It was later determined that the Guardsmen had fired about 67 shots in a matter of 13 seconds.
That's crazy.
Just a few years ago, the murder of George Floyd and the video of him struggling to breathe while an officer of the state knelt on his neck and his back for over 9 minutes shocked the consciousness of the nation. It led to a summer of protests, calls for police reform, heightened awareness of the injustices that people of color continue to experience at the hands of law enforcement. Perhaps we wouldn't have actually gone through that reckoning if it wasn't for the footage of Floyd's murder filmed by bystanders in Minneapolis. 5.5 years later, footage coming out of Minneapolis, this time of ICE's aggression tactics against immigrants and citizens alike, is forcing us to reckon once again about where we are as a nation and where we go from here.
I thought that was important to see. Obviously, the parallels, it's not new, you know. We keep on acting like this is all new because we lie to ourselves. The narrative is wrong. America is this exceptional place. In fact, this is the 250th anniversary of the United States, the founding of the United States of America, which is completely accurate. But to say that it's a 250-year anniversary of American democracy is a lie. Simple and plain. American democracy, about 50, going on 58 years, and we'll go on to that a little bit later, but it is a civil rights movement that brings about this democracy that we know now, this multicultural, multiracial. Before that, in fact, there were a lot of acts passed in 1964, 1965, including an Immigration Act in 1965. Okay, look, I want to go ahead and start telling you all this stuff, but excuse me, we have video to go on that. So, but I would like to, at this point, just speak to the war footing that we must be on. On the call I was at, an NAACP board member, Michael Curry, Dr. Michael Curry, a shout out to him. He said that what would you have done in the civil rights movement? Because this is our civil rights moment. But I fear that without the understanding of the cultural, that this is a continuation. The same people have been passing down their battle for generations to basically wipe out my people as an African American. For centuries, they lost the last battle, which was the Civil Rights War. So there's a Civil War. Then 100 years later, there's the Civil Rights, the same battle. It's just that it's now ideological, you know. Things come on, there's certain things that you can't do without losing, which is kind of what's going on worldwide now, is that America has lost its moral authority. We can't tell anybody, oh, you are, doing human rights abuses. It was like so funny. Trump was threatening Iran that, right, don't kill your protesters. Meanwhile, it was the same time that Renee Nicole Good, say her name, was killed, a protester. We've lost that moral authority. And that's what Black African American history, I try not to say Black history because that's our internalization of what we've been called Black. But Black people, as African American history, it tells the true story of America. That's why it must be erased so that we can continue, well, not so we, but so that the Confederate ideology, to some extent, the multicultural, the immigrants, all the people who have learned and digested the false narrative of America, the so-called exceptional example of America, that history, we nullify it. We remove its moral authority. So that's why our history, if this regime is successful, you can basically just count it that our history is gone. Okay? And this is what they're doing now. We're trying to even stop the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day from being celebrated. So, we're going to So it's important to understand how deep it is. And now we're going to take the twist, right, into the core of the matter, because you see, all these other things that are happening, it's all based around their ideology, which is fed primarily by their religion. Now, in my studies of this, and remember, it's not like I'm teaching you much things that are new. I'm just giving you this cultural framework, this land use framework that basically center of what we know. It's kind of like saying that Christopher Columbus discovered the United States of America, right? We've all heard that, right? And we know that that's not true because Christopher Columbus met the native and indigenous tribes that used to live all around the United States and eradicated them, formed treaties with them, broke the treaties, and genocided them from the whole United States of America, basically, except for the small reservations. You cannot advocate for that narrative of Christopher Columbus without erasing African Americans. You cannot, and without erasing Native Americans from their history, right? Because if they were discovered, that means by spewing that narrative, right? Similarly, you cannot say America has a 250-year democracy if that erases African Americans, because that means that for all this time, even though we weren't equal members of society, we were enslaved, we were segregated, we were brutally beaten, we couldn't get justice, they were all white. To be honest, until 1968, there was only a 12-year period, which was the Reconstruction after the Civil War, that you can even plausibly argue that there was any democracy in the South. Because in fact, that's when the first African American senators and congressmen get elected by their, by the African Americans in the South, right? This is the only time. So, and like we know what happened. So in essence, really, there really wasn't no real democracy practice in the South prior to 1968. And I use 1968 for a reason. I'm going to talk about it later, but it's important to understand the propaganda. Okay? This is what we're fighting at. That's really what the crux of this jihad, this holy war, this fight against Christian nationalism is about. I like to say, I like to join Malcolm X and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's Al-Haji Malcolm X and or Malik Shabazz and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King saying, I like to say, we must win this holy war by any peaceful means necessary. So I'm not advocating for anybody to go out there and cause any violence, because we don't do that, right? We're the good guys. So the only thing we do have is our speech. So that means that we can't use it loosey-goosey. We have to do the research to really use the right terminology and phrase things properly. Because like I said, with the Christopher Columbus example, you could say something. That's why if you don't put the Reverend, you're not saying in essence that whether you believe it or not, he was a Reverend first before he was a doctor. You're not reinforcing that whether you believe it or not, he believed it and he was sanctioned by God. And it may not mean anything to you, but it does mean to a whole lot to people who are trying to make it a Christian nation, that in fact, their culture assassinated the most influential Christian leader. So raising his name up, you see that dynamic, that power dynamic, that moral authority dynamic? The more you raise that Reverend, then you are very covertly limiting the moral authority of their Christian nation, their moral authority to ask for one. Very important concept. So let's get into this clip. I've been talking for a long time, so passionate about this. But this goes into this narrative and what the Christian nationalists are doing. This guy, Tim Whitaker, is a former Christian nationalist, and he's reformed himself, and he's speaking out.
The oppressed and oppressor. Josh, I want you to be clear. I want to be clear. I didn't learn about oppression or oppressed versus oppressor from critical theory. I just looked around. I just read like Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise. I just read history. I look around watching people in power, like literally ICE agents are given blanket immunity according to Stephen Miller and Trump. I see what they're doing to people in the streets who are peacefully protesting. I see how they oppress people to exercise their God-given right. I see how they are literally ripping people off of the streets, separating women and children, and oppressing them. I don't need critical theory or whatever you think critical theory is to teach me that. That's just reality. It's reality. But Josh knows his audience. He knows all the trigger words. He knows if he can bring in critical theory. Oh, liberal, Marxism, communism, atheist. Oh, this is godless. That's the connection. In Josh's mind, you can't be a Christian and like a critical theory expert. You can't be a Christian and embrace some tenets of Marxism. They're untenable for him. So if you're either godless and a critical theorist, or you're a good Bible-believing Christian who believes that God has ordained the current administration to enforce biblical law. That's how this logic operates, and you're watching it happen in real time. Again, we'd love your comments, friends, what you think about this so far. Make sure to like and subscribe, but it's very important that you understand what's going on.
Or any of the details, just based on where they stand in the social structure. So I know this is super awkward, but I'm just going to say it. For instance, what critical theory does is it's like, hey man, there's oppressed minorities, and then there's oppressor white police officers. So then if you start thinking that way, whenever you hear a Michael Brown or whatever the situation is, you predetermine who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, not based on any evidence of the case, just based on where they fit in the intersectionality structure.
Okay, maybe I should get the critical theorist on here so we can debunk this stuff in real time. But to be very clear, I go back to the data. White evangelicals, 80% of them voted for Trump. Trump was very clear that he thought immigrants were poisoning the blood of society, that Mexico wasn't sending their best, that he was going to create mass deportations. So it's not a wild stretch to imagine that if you meet a white evangelical, they are in favor of what Trump is currently doing. And what Trump is doing is using the power of the federal government to invade cities to oppress people, including local citizens who aren't being targeted. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the footage out of Minneapolis the past few days. I mean, it's like the freaking military's there. Again, for no reason. We know that statistically, ICE is kidnapping people who overwhelmingly have no criminal record, no violent convictions. I think the number is something like 93% have like no violent convictions. This is not about public safety. This is not about law and order. This is about whiteness. This is about white Christian nationalism.
This is about white nationalism, right? So all the lies and pretense, I think we need to be very clear about it, okay? Almost everything that comes out of this regime is a lie, because really it's all smoke and mirrors, of course, to distract from the Epstein files. But remember, we talk about the Venezuela issue, and we're all so, the president, the Maduro guy was taken out. Oh man, we're all awesome. Do you realize that they have not mentioned drugs since they got the oil? And this is something I haven't been hearing on, even on my podcast that I watch. This over 100 people died because it was drugs. You forgot about that? So 100 people were unalived because 100 people were unalived because of drugs. And then you go in, do this, and then now it's all about oil. So those 100 people, those are lives. See the inhumanity, and most of us have been the narrative moves so fast. That's new. I mean, how the torrent speed at which every thing is coming on. I can't even keep up. Right? The torrent speed that the news is coming out. I mean, now they're doing tariffs on Greenland, right? All these narratives, right? They bomb Nigerian because of white Christianity. I'm half Nigerian. I'll tell you, yes, the Christians are getting attacked, but the Muslims are equally getting attacked. It's not that kind of thing. Okay, it's not like one side and all this other. No, it is literally tribal wars between Christians and Muslims, and there is both sides there. And this is truly a both sides issue. I'm not. I lived in Nigeria for most of half of my life. Okay, so every single narrative is being tonight. We all saw what happened to Renee Nicole Good. Say her name. Say her name. We all saw what happened. Okay. She was, one thing people don't talk about, she reversed. If you're trying to run people over, why are you reversing? Right? She was not trying to run over. Everybody saw it with their own two eyes. And they can lie and lie and lie. Like they tell you that the groceries are cheap, even though we all know the economy sucks. Okay? The election was stolen when it wasn't. Okay? After all the torrent of propaganda and lies, the truth begins to shift. And because there's so much coming, you can't even keep up. Right? Very little people you go on your YouTube, see if you see anything on the Epstein files, which, remind you, he signed a law. Trump signed a law in November. And they were supposed to release it by December, middle of December. And it's still not released up today. And we're not talking about it because what's going on in Venezuela, Greenland, Minnesota. And that's how, after a while, you won't mention it. That's why I had to mention those 100+ souls that lost their lives off the coast of Venezuela. Because apparently, after they got a bomb dropped on them, remember the double tap, which is a war crime? After you get bombed by oh my God, you can't make this up. After you get bombed by a U.S. Navy, Air Force jet military missile in the water, and like 8 people die and like 2 people left, your main concern is to go get those drugs and to find your way from the middle of the ocean. Not laughing because it's funny. It's just the ridiculousness of the narrative. That's what they believe. And that's what this other side is constantly being fed through Fox News and all the ecosystems. And they're consistently, which is why the deprogramming of these people. And when we get into power, who knows? We have to come with a war footing. It's not like go back there. We have, the Supreme Court has luckily made it so that the president now is basically a king. We've got to, if we get back in, which I don't think they want us to get back in because they know we'll probably do that to them. They've actually already said that if we get back to power, a lot of them are going to jail because you can only imagine the crimes and the investigations that need to happen. All these things, all the reverse narrative, all the topsy-turvy, upside-down world that they want us to believe. Some people are believing this. And they're going full speed ahead with their full beliefs of their worldview, which is reinforced by all these lies. There's no climate change. Instead for investigating the officer, which is actually standard practice that shot Renee Good, they want to investigate Tim Walz, the governor, and the mayor of Minneapolis. This is what is so dangerous. This is why Redline Narratives, and I want to send a shout out to so many of the podcasters I listen to that, because even the CBS News is now capitulated, right? And all the legacy media, they're going to withhold your licenses. We need to be withholding some licenses too, so that people can't be spewing lies. At least we're on the side of the truth and facts. And this is where the moderates need to get off their high horse, right? Okay, I want to say something that I learned recently, and it's actually very profound, and I want you to hear me out on this. I was watching a podcast, and there's a Jewish man, and he was explaining to us some of the things he was asking his mother, because his mother survived the concentration camp. And for those who don't know, it was actually looked at, because there were a lot of Jewish people that sold out other Jews in order to save themselves, right, from the gas chambers. I'm not saying that, I don't know if they were that successful, but they were able to save themselves by selling out other Jewish people. So if you made it out of the concentration camps, it was usually like there was this kind of cloud of suspicion, like, were you one of those people that sold out your people? And said that, of course, no, his mother was not one of them. She was always used to like condemn and curse those people out that did such things. But she did say that, so he did ask her, was this something you weren't proud of? And that's when he mentioned this phrase that I had never heard about, even with all my work within the Jewish community. He said that the best did not make it out. I didn't understand that phrase, and he further explained. So when you're in a concentration camp, they would, just maybe make a big pot of water and throw full of vegetables in there and call it soup, but that's all you had to eat. I mean, if you see some of the images from the concentration camps with the frail skins, I mean, one of the things that, it was so frail, and I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to think of a word to say it, but I don't want you to go see it, but I want you to see that, like when you see the footage of the concentration camps of the people when they freed them, I don't know how to say this, but their backsides, their butts, right? There were no cheeks. You could see the anus. You could see it because it was literally so thin and frail. That's all gross, but I feel that's what I'm saying. Some things you have to say. I'm trying to say it as softly as possible because I don't want to gross anybody out, but I just want you to know how the bones, you could see everything. So what they mean by the best didn't make it out is that the scholars, the more affluent in the community, which is what they were referring to, the best, because of their educated, more soft and understanding and compassionate, you're wealthy, you're not a person that's struggling on the streets, you're not a criminal, you're not used to fighting for your survival. They would not be able to struggle with the people on the streets. I mean, that's just normal, right? The people on the streets that are struggling and starving in Boston today would be more able to struggle and know how to survive with less than people who are, have $1 million portfolios. They're softer. And that's what they meant. All those people died in the concentration camps. Those people aren't alive, unfortunately, God rest their souls. But that is what I fear happening in America, that those of us, the African Americans that have been saying this for a long time and suffering and just pushing on no matter what, surviving with nothing, right? Up to today, those that have the power, those with the money, and are comfortable with their comfortable lives living in the suburbs and the wealthy neighborhoods of Boston, they don't understand it's now a time to fight. And it means that you're going to have to maybe break some laws, because trust me, let me tell you something. I want to be very clear. Sitting at lunch counters, you see that civil rights, they were breaking the law, right? Slavery was the law of the land. Fighting against slavery was breaking the law. The law by apartheid in South Africa, which is the same thing we were doing here. Just, I don't know why segregation is the name, but fine. Apartheid in South Africa was the law. So if you fight against it, so Mandela was breaking the law. So you must be very understanding that that is where we are at. Trying to navigate the laws and all this other stuff that I see a lot of the traditional Democrats, the Schumers and all the old school Democrats trying to talk, with strongly worded letters. That time is past. We must resist by every peaceful means necessary. And that's why the protesters, that's what they're doing. Yes, they're not violent, but they're blowing whistles. They're, making noise. They're filming. They're agitating. They're not allowing the Nikes of these untrained, and I don't want to dehumanize them too much because, yes, but they're literally, it's kind of like the Matrix where they're agents because they're tapped into the Matrix, but they're not really, they've been lied to for generations. For generations. This is not one group, this is like one generation, 2 generations of lies of black people and that people of color are not equal. If you like black people as a person, a white person, you're a N lover. All these things are conditioned them for so long with their religion backing it up that I feel to remember, if you are a Christian or any person of conscience, we must not lose our humanity as they have lost theirs. Because see, when you are a bigot, when you are dehumanizing others, people don't realize you're dehumanizing yourself. You're getting used to seeing people suffer, and it's literally removing your humanity every day, which is why I think that in general, Confederate culture is so cruel because they've lost their humanity. In a way, they've sold their soul to the devil. By practicing the hate, you become the hate. So, I know I went on for a while there, but this is a very important part of the podcast. I wanted to make sure that we're very clear on what is happening here. All right. And now, there's this thing about the Nazis. Oh my God, they hate being called Nazis. I say to stop acting like Nazis. Let me be very, there's a guy named Stephen Miller. I believe he's the one behind this. And I'll say that what he does and what we do at the African American Academy, we have events around African American culture and history. And we try to, because our history needs to be built up because it's been so erased, we are, trying to put together a lot of these cultural, connect the dots and try to have events and all these, and symbolism and use words and all these things around our history. This Stephen Miller does the same thing for white supremacy. In New York, I don't know, it was a year or two ago or whatever, they did a Nazi, I should have put that on here, but, and there is a video about it on Abby Phillips did a segment where the white, they talk about this. There was in 1934, there was a Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden, and there was the symbolism of George Washington behind the podium, and they were trying to say that Hitler would have been good friends to George Washington, all sorts of stuff. And the comparison to Nazis, actually, to be honest, it's not fair on Nazis. I'll say it again. It's not fair on Nazis. Because, see, like I said, Nazis is, as horrific atrocity, crime against humanity that it was. It's a 15-year, it's a span. It's not an intergenerational going back to 1807, right? Going back to the found 1776 or 1630, whatever benchmark. It's not something that has been ingrained in multiple generations like that. So the Nazis, when they were, their laws, and this comes up later, let me not go into too much of it. Okay, I'll stop. But all that is based on Confederate culture. It's not based on that. So let's listen to this lady and hear what she has to say, and we'll come back on the other side of the clip.
I'm watching the rise of Christian nationalism in America, and it is terrifying. And if you think, well, that could never really go wrong, spend 2 minutes with me. And let's look honestly at what happened in Germany before World War II. I'm coming to you from Germany. I've studied this so deeply. In the 1930s, many German Christians surrendered their faith wholesale to the rising power of Adolf Hitler, whom they eventually worshipped. The Nazis wanted to fuse Christianity with the nationalist racist, and authoritarian ideas. So what did they do? They created something called the Reichskirche, or the Church of the Empire. A so-called Christian church that put the state, the gospel. And tragedy also was that many church leaders who were hungry for power and security, they embraced it wholesale. They twisted schism and violence. Loving your neighbor fell off the commandments first. It was forgotten. Instead, loyalty to nation and leader became the new leading commandment. And what also happened is that most Christians then went along. Obviously, their priests and their pastors were leading the way. And genuine faith was replaced by political dogma. The cross was, decorated in a flag, and Jesus was reduced to some sort of a mascot for the empire. And that is exactly what Christian nationalism is doing today in my home country, in the U.S. It demands Christians put America first, their political leader first, and it says that true faith means loyalty to one party and one leader, no matter the cost to Jesus's actual teachings. So we see Christian symbols that are used and Christian language that is used to push policies of exclusion and even violence. We see truth bent to fit propaganda. We see a movement that thinks it alone defines what Christianity is and who belongs in God's family and who even belongs in the nation. And we know what comes when the church becomes an arm of the state. The lesson of the Reichskirche of Germany, where I have lived for many, many years, is clear. Whenever faith bows down to political power, it corrupts both the church and the country. It happened here in Germany. It can happen anywhere, including, yes, the United States of America, and it's our sacred duty to resist, to follow Jesus, not Caesar, to love the least of these, not to chase earthly power. Christians out there, don't be fooled. History is yelling a warning. The question is if you'll listen.
I learned about that during the research for this podcast. And I knew that the Nazis were Christian. Please understand. And they, the separation of church and state, they try to make this an imperial church, as she said. And that's exactly what's happening now. I can tell you, the Roland Martin show, there's a lot of great content on there. Like I said, all these videos are available on Afro-American TV. So please like and subscribe, and you'll be able to learn and see. And I put them on in real time as I watch them. So you'll be able to really see the whole clips of, the whole videos and a whole lot more on there. But wrapping Jesus Christ in these fake narratives and using the Christianity and, they say Trump has been compared to Jesus. This is what they're saying. It's not me. And that he, despite all his failings, and when I don't want to go into all what he's done, right? He's a potential pedophile. I do think he's a pedophile. I personally think that he's done it because of the words about grabbing stuff and all this other stuff, but he's an immoral man. And for that is so, and it's antithetical. And the video after this will really speak to that. Then that using the state to espouse Christian belief and impose it on others is inherently not Christian. It's supposed to be free will. It's supposed to be something you do because, hey, you have the faith, right? They attack Muslims. They attack Muslims, even though if you did a little research, you might understand that Islam, right, has Isa, who is Jesus. They believe in Jesus. They believe in the resurrection. They believe in the Virgin Mary. So, let's just call it what it is. This has nothing to do with even the religion, because it's not based on facts. It's not based on the true teachings. It's just some inherent evil force that, and like I said, I don't want to dehumanize the person, but it's because of the conditioning for centuries that, and you notice also how Confederate culture is. Remember, I'm not saying Republican. Please note, I'm not saying Republican because I believe that I believe in a two-party system. I believe in the United States of America, the framework of the United States of America. And I believe that we do need a Republican Party, but we just need conservative Americans, people that believe in America. Once you're outside of that belief in America, and you don't believe in a multicultural, multiracial place where everyone, the beloved community of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, once you don't believe in that, you're not, I don't like to say you're un-American, but yes, you're un-American. I'm not going to say what you're not. I'm going to say what you are. You're a Confederate. You're a segregationist. You're just, the segregationist. How would I say this? The same states, all the states that voted, that tried to secede 100 years later in the Civil War, voted against the Civil Rights Act. So it's the same group of people. Whether it's, they try to say Republican or Democrat. Oh, we were Republicans. We're the ones that free. No, those Republicans came from the North. Culture is location-based. Please note that. So it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. It's still the South. It was still the South. That's the constant. The people that voted to free the slaves were still from the North. Not saying that Lincoln was this perfect person, no, or the North didn't have racism and segregation. Of course it did. But what I'm trying to say is that even the civil rights movement, right, they give Lyndon B. Johnson because they are minimizing the name of John F. Kennedy, which is from Boston, a son of Boston from the North, and a son of Christians. But a different kind of Christian, the Roman Catholic Christian, not the Christian, the Southern Baptist, Confederate Christian, right? So that's what I mean, that we can't look at race, we must look at culture, all right? And this is, a very powerful thing that we're fighting, and it goes to show that this is an intergenerational cultural holy war. They've declared the holy war. They're not going to stop. They're not going to be nice. They're going to get worse, right? You can see what's going on in Minnesota, and this is coming to, I think they said Maine is next. Boy, when they come to Boston, I'm on those streets. I promise you that, because this is not something that we can play with, all right? And they're probably going to be in my neighborhood because of all, what's going on, right? Because I'm living in a community of color, obviously. So we must be very careful. This is from the Reconstruction from John Brown. This is all that rolled into one. And I want to listen to this white pastor that was talking to Roland Martin, and he's from the South, okay? I didn't play that part, but he says that, I grew up conditioned to believe these things as well. So let's listen to him and come back on the other side of the clip.
25, the last 30 plus years, I've actually read the Bible, a whole lot about the poor, helping those in need. And what these folks are saying is, damn them, we gonna ride with the billionaires.
Yeah, you could use the word, it is anti-Christ. It is the opposite of what Christ taught. And the reality is, if you think about it, it would be the ultimate deception to have that which is against Christ or anti-Christ to hide itself inside a religion with the name of Christ. And I believe that's what we're seeing right now. The book of Revelation, the actual word behind it is apocalypse. And I know many of us have like a modern understanding of what apocalypse is, but the actual original Greek, it means literally an unveiling. And a part of what the writer behind the book of Revelation is doing, and a lot of people see that book and they're like, man, that guy, he must have been like strung out on mushrooms or something. It's so symbolic and chaotic and looks like he's having hallucinations. But when you get into the book, it's incredibly profound of how John is writing about what's happening in that oppressive first century world with this authoritarian dictator leaders that had been passed down from the Caesars. And what you see is John is encouraging these followers of Jesus, because you have religion getting in bed with empire, and some being convinced that it may actually be the way, like the way to peace, the way to salvation. They bought into this lie. They bought into a myth of like redemptive violence. And John says, no, 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 no. What I'm trying to do here is I want to expose, I want to pull the curtain back. I want to unveil what's happening, because I want you to see behind the scenes of actually what is going on here. And a part of what we're doing as a collective, so I pastor this church.
That was extremely powerful. When I saw this, I was I was floored, because it is true. That makes a lot of sense. That wouldn't evil hide itself within Christianity in order to market itself as good, right? And like he said, that's what he said. And he's, like I said, he's from the South. That's like genius, right? I mean, when you think about it, when you think about it, does evil really care if you call it evil so far you're doing what it needs you to do? It's just brilliant. Now, the second part I thought that was interesting about that clip was he also mentions that the true meaning of apocalypse is unveiling. And I thought that really crystallized it for me, because so what are we unveiling in this time? We're unveiling the true nature of the United States of America, which, like I've said earlier, is connected, which is African American history. So remember, I said that African American history would unlock. That is the unveiling. So I'm not going to go as far as to say there's the apocalypse and all that. I mean, that's for other people to believe, is whether you have faith in that or not. It's irrelevant whether you think it is or not. But what I'm trying to say is that the unveiling, right, is part of it. And that's why the Reverend matters. That's why saying the word Reverend matters, because it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's just one more little notch in unveiling that the side of good, right? So, I mean, this is not necessarily, this is good versus evil. Whether you are religious or not, it's not really the issue at this point. What it is that the good is literally needed to be unveiled. But for the good to be unveiled, we have to go to this truth. So, and our truth has been skewed over centuries by the lies of evil. So we say Dr. Martin Luther King, because, hey, that's easier on the truth. I mean, that's easier to say. That's something that now hides the fact that truly it was a righteous movement. It was a movement with moral authority. So those that lost should not have the moral authority to question DEI, should not have the moral authority to remove MLK from anything. Right? They don't have the moral authority, because they're the ones that caused it. They don't have the moral authority to say that they're being oppressed. So it literally just shoots their whole narrative in the foot. So I thought that this was a very powerful moment, but I have to work and everything, so I'm going to just do my podcast and have fun doing it. And I'll make the clips and make everything available. So let's go on to the next clip by Danielle Moody. I love this lady. She says it like it is. There are probably a couple of F-bombs in this next clip, because she doesn't hold back. And I think that that's sometimes, like I try to say, if you can't say certain things without the emphasis of the F-bomb for it to really make sense. And I let me reiterate a little bit. So imagine if me and you are having a disagreement, but really what it was that I came up to you and just slapped you in your face and threw all your things out, or just did something really horrible to you. Or maybe it's like saying that Renee Good and the ICE agent had a disagreement. Technically, it was a disagreement, but it's literally a lie because it's way bigger than a disagreement, right? And that's why sometimes the F-bomb is necessary just to give the kind of emphasis to bring it closer to the truth. So let's watch
that
this
is
clip.
the moment where it can change. And when it comes to history, that's the wildest thing is we always want to look at fascism and Nazism as if they're aberrations that took place in Western Europe in the middle of the 20th century.
Yep.
We don't like to look at the fact that the Nazis were incredibly inspired by the United States of America. Took
Yep.
our laws, took our eugenics, took our apartheid state, all of it. And what you just brought up after the Civil War, and for people who are like shaking their heads and are like, are we actually in a Civil War? The Civil War started before the firing on Fort Sumter.
Yeah.
Like, it started with the abolition movement. It started with border wars. It started with all of these like movements, right? It just wasn't made official until the state got involved with it. That's when it took off. What happens after it? We need to do something. I don't know, a reconstruction. That's not going to work because we don't want, to hurt white people. Let's have a handshake deal. We'll hand over the South to the Ku Klux Klan and institutionalized white supremacy, and everyone will just go about their business.
Yep.
Then you get into 1950s, 1960s, and black people say, that's not enough. We deserve rights. We deserve to be treated better. Notice how long it took to even get there. And for a while, liberals are like, well, the country is growing. We're making more money. We're becoming more powerful. I guess we'll go ahead and give out rights or, to go ahead and stay sort of a revolutionary state. Now they're going to take it away. And where do they go?
Oh, man. My bad. Oh, man. My bad. I sneakily hit the button. Let's start that again. Hey, this is a live show, so please bear with me.
That is the moment where it can change. And when it comes to history, that's the wildest thing is we always want to look at fascism and Nazism as if they're aberrations that took place in Western Europe in the middle of the 20th century.
Yep.
We don't like to look at the fact that the Nazis were incredibly inspired by the United States of America. Took our laws, took our eugenics, took our apartheid state, all of it. And what you just brought up after the Civil War, and for people who are like shaking their heads and are like, are we actually in a Civil War? The Civil War started before the firing on Fort Sumter.
Yeah.
Like, it started with the abolition movement. It started with border wars. It started with all of these like movements, right? It just wasn't made official until the state got involved with it. That's when it took off. What happens after it? We need to do something. I don't know, a reconstruction. That's not going to work because we don't want, to hurt white people. Let's have a handshake deal. We'll hand over the South to the Ku Klux Klan and institutionalized white supremacy, and everyone will just go about their business.
Yep.
Then you get into 1950s, 1960s, and black people say, that's not enough. We deserve rights. We deserve to be treated better. Notice how long it took to even get there. And for a while, the country is growing. We're making more money. We're becoming more powerful. I guess we'll go ahead and give out rights or, to go ahead and stay sort of a revolutionary state. Now they're going to take it away. And where do they go, Danielle? They go to the past. That's all that these motherfuckers want to do. They want to go back to everything from the robber barons to the apartheid state. And by the way, it's everybody's on the table at this point. That's the frightening thing people need to realize.
That's the thing, is that the alarms have been going off in this country forever, right? 2020, we had the summer uprising. Why? Because we're home during the pandemic. And what do we see? What do we all see with our own eyes? We see a white police officer literally pull the life out of a black man.
And Danielle, just on that point, for people who are still struggling to keep up with everything, think about this. In 2020, we saw George Floyd brutally murdered in front of our eyes by the Minneapolis police. Who are the Democrats telling us are going to save us from ICE now? The Minneapolis police that we were just talking about defunding and moving that away from. That's fascist creep. What you just brought up, it's incredible that Minneapolis is the center of this and that it just keeps going down this road. But what you just brought up, like, it's the equivalent of being on a boat. You have to occasionally look at the horizon and be like, oh my God, I've floated out a ways.
I feel like a lot of this that we are witnessing is terrible. It is awful. And it's also not new.
No.
And this is the thing that I like, it pains me to say because I need white people to really understand that when Black people have been trying to tell you for centuries about who the fuck this country is, about what it has done, about the fact that that people have been jailed, beaten, and murdered, their homes torched, dragged out by the Klan, by police officers, bombed as late as the 1980s in Pennsylvania that was state sanctioned. Folks, like, this shit has been happening, but it was happening to the Black community, and it was made to seem justifiable because by birth, Black people are what? Criminals. Black people are what? Violent. They need to be put down, right? And they need to be kept in their place, right? So the justification for the policies and the domestic terrorism that has happened at the hands of police in this country, what Donald Trump has just done is said, hey, y'all, remember those things called slave patrols? Like, I don't know anything about history because I don't read a fucking book, but let's throw some money at the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and see if they don't want to rough up some minorities, you know? And then they get to call themselves patriots and they get a full check.
And what is ICE at this point? ICE is a white male jobs program. That's what ICE is now. In an environment and an economy in which people are struggling to get jobs, they have created an independent paramilitary above all scrutiny and above all approach that is ideologically and economically dependent upon the dictatorial regime.
Yeah. But there was a whole lead up before that, and afterwards there was also everything leading up, Jim Crow, segregation, black codes, all that is the same war from the same people, practice the same Christianity. It's all sorts of but this is so this means that there was there before and there after, right? And you can see that almost all the things that they're trying to achieve at this moment is to reverse and remove Voting Rights Act and to chip out the power of the achievements of the Civil Rights Movement and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And this Southern ideology goes from the eugenics. This is where I know I jumped ahead, but this when they were talking about how the Nazis learned everything they know. They're like, oh man, how do we become real racist? Oh, guess what? There's this tribe of white folks in the 1930s. They would say, so this is something that is American as an apple pie. And when you hear matters, this is not who we are. There's no space in America for this kind of hatred. It's always been space for this kind of America. America is a racist country that has been trying since its founding to move towards a more perfect union. Right. So when did we get from lucky racist country to democracy? So when did it become a democracy? After Civil War, it was a democracy because there was Jim Crow, there was white color. If you look at that, you will know that this is not a democracy. It was never a democracy. Unless the South actually seceded, which they didn't, so it was still part of America. America was not a democracy. So the ideological defeat, that's what we're going through now. The legal defeat of that's why we're civil rights. So technically, by law, defeated in 1968, finally. Well, which means it's 1964, 1968, right? It's the battles of war. So that the first one was the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act, and 65 was along with, and it was later the Immigration Act that really changed a lot of the immigrants to come, and then finally the Housing Act in 1968, which made it legal for like apartheid segregation to be legal. Before that, there was no racial justice. So I don't want to hear it's a democracy, but I can't. Okay, so funny enough, what we're going to do now, we're actually going back to America. You guys want to do, which is why my God wants to make America great, because they want to go back to where it's always been. For the last 60 years, in fact, the 1968, right? 68 years coming up in April. I can tell you the exact date when it came. April 11, 1968. That's when it became democracy, a technically democracy. That Nigeria, my father's from, Nigeria has an older democracy than the United States because they were practicing democracy ever since then. While we were in 1960, while we were in 1968, and that is why it's so that's why there's been no reparations. That's why there's no care work. There's no fighting for now. That's what we're trying to fight for. Because like I said, that's a lot. If you solve that, and that is forever, there will be no authority for this side to exist. We will be teaching about this, and eventually we will be programming. After the Nazis, people don't realize this, that after the Nazis were defeated, the Germans changed their whole education system to make sure that they would be programming, they would not define themselves. They've come to that reckoning, which is what we have never done. And until we do that, this is my prediction, until that is done, that is the real key. You cannot say we're going to fight for equality and justice and not have reparations. It's not possible. It's the Christopher Columbus metaphor I used earlier, where you can't say that Christopher Columbus discovered America at the same time recognize and honor indigenous Native American heritage. You can't do this things at the same time. You cannot have the equality, the equity that we need in this United States. You cannot create that with reparations being done. And it's not financial reparations. I have cultural reparations framework. Do that. This year. But anyway, I digress. So let's move on to the next clip. I know, man, I've been going for a while, but I talk too much because I love and so passionate about this work. But it's great. So this one is going to be about a great historian, John Meacham. He's going to explain a little bit more. We'll get into it in the second.
By John Meacham. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer and presidential historian. Meacham is the author of many important books. His newest book, American Struggle, Democracy, Dissent, and the Pursuit of a More Perfect Union, an anthology, is set to debut next month. Meacham was also awarded the National Humanities Medal by then-President Joe Biden. John, great to see you again. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Al. You're putting me out of business. That was a terrific history lesson, and I would argue history lesson doesn't do justice to it. You're telling a story that we have to tell.
And we're leaning into the work of people like you to tell that story, because on one hand, the historian in you knows that somehow this too shall pass, and history indicates that we will likely prevail and be stronger. But in this moment, I imagine there are people watching you and me and feeling anxious and not sure that's going to happen, because we look at other pieces of history from around the world that say sometimes these moments don't end up with something better on the other end.
Yeah, I don't know that it's likely that we prevail. All we have is the evidence of our past, which is that we have just barely managed to keep this experiment toward a more perfect union unfolding. But historically speaking, 250 years is about 20 minutes. And so this is a very young democracy. If I may, you talked about Bloody Sunday, one of the hinges of history. You could argue, in fact, we aren't a country genuinely founded in 1776, that the country we have today, the republic, the multiracial democracy that is under stress today, really only came into being in 1965 with the Civil Rights Act in 64, the Voting Rights Act in 65, and importantly, the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1965, which President Johnson signed in New York Harbor, that took the old 1924 nativist, isolationist 1920s immigration numbers and shook those up. That was the immigration regime, by the way, that the State Department chose to follow when declining to accept more refugees from fascist Europe and Nazi Germany. And so we're a young country. And one of the things that I think this season is telling us is the human factor here cannot be overestimated. Both the character of the person we put in power, the character of the people that we entrust to watch those in power, our elected official, and all of us. Because standing up against all of this, and I'll confess it, I don't know if you feel this way, I rebuke myself all the time because I've fallen prey to being exhausted by the tsunami of outrage that
I plead guilty too. I plead guilty too. And yet all of what you have written about and we have studied in history says that those who came before us in each of these instances, when I talk about the fight against slavery, the fight for suffrage, the fight for labor rights, the fight for civil rights, the fight, all of these, you didn't have a right to be exhausted, or at least those who came before us had to make choices to say, I must get up and keep going.
Yeah, you didn't have the privilege to be exhausted, right? If you look like me, if you look, I'm a boringly heterosexual white Southern male Episcopalian, right? Things work out for me in this country. The point of the country is it's supposed to work out for everyone.
I know what I'm saying is factual, but at the end of the day, I mean, you want to hear it. It's part of the culture, right? And I heard him say, although I didn't think that it's supposed to go that the last act, which is the 1960s, that's still what like, like the beginning of the war and the end of the war. But he does say it. We are living in a very young democracy because that's when this America we understand today was born. And who was the leader that made that happen? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. This religious movement, rabbis and all sorts of different things, bringing people together in a nonviolent movement, which is exactly what Jesus was a pacifist, right? Everyone was advocating was actually for civil, but at the end of the day, it was advocating for everyone. All the enemies that you see here today because of the civil rights movement, the sacrifices African Americans have made, doing their language, doing their food, their culture, everything they did as was because they were here, and that is why it unlocks this story, this real narrative of the United States of America that began a long time ago. In the beginning, there were four cultures. There was the Native and the Native and Indigenous Americans, including Mexicans, the Mayans, and all of that, right? There were African Americans who were over two groups of Americans and didn't agree to be American. They were forced to be American, which is why they have a special status. Maybe were 3/5 of a person, right? This is, then they were, well, we would just say white, but like I tell people, just like Europe has different areas, you have English, just English, you have French, you have Italian, you have Russian, German, it goes on and on. America had two different cultures of white people. A tribe in the north and a tribe in the south. A tribe in the north embraced multiculturalism, industrialization, education. They moved more lockstep with Europe and in the south, right? So look at like the upper management, which is the north, the industrialization, right? The factories, that's why they abolished. Like we have factories better than using slaves. But the South refused. That's one thing about white supremacy, right? They're trying to themselves. So isolate themselves. When you go to war, you don't just keep it around. You keep improving, produces better results because. And I don't want to make it sound like they're dumb people or whatever. No, that's not it. You call them end buffers. You can imagine what the word is, right? But in essence, these four groups, the North and the South, right? That's what this fight was about. Whether you were going to respect the people that were black and South. I always say they always minimize John F. Kennedy, like Lyndon Johnson, just like they say Reverend, that's what they say Dr. Martin Luther King, they leave out the Reverend. They leave out the fact that it was truly, this was John F. Kennedy, he got assassinated. In fact, there's a not so fun fact. Every time there's a civil rights bill, still one in like 1860 something, like the Civil War or the civil rights, an American president is assassinated by somebody from some coincidence. I think not. So John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and Lyndon Johnson took over, and like he was signed it, he proposed it. He was following up because he was the vice president, so he had to do the mandate of his boss. And these four groups have been just, mixing, and then of course, as we get into the late 1800s and the early 1900s, here come more European immigrants who are also treated just as bad. Like, in fact, my group, my research, Italians was the second, I guess, who had reached the second most. The far second, but still, there's still people that got reached the second most. Of course, the Irish indenture, which is why John F. Kennedy, was Irish and all that, was Roman Catholic, and that's why, agriculturally was probably brought to that level too. another lady's name, Kamala Harris. What do I mean by this? Because the Democrats, right? To be honest, I could use a lot of language today, but they are such powers, right? Right now, literally, once the person who was nominated, that's the situation was nominated, so I actually give them a little credit on that. She didn't really know, but still, she was the candidate for the Democratic Party. And when you go back and look at some of the speeches during her 107 days running for presidency, you will see she said it was verbatim. This was not and the Democratic narrative is that, oh my God, the message is wrong. What do we do wrong? We were saying the truth. But you were just outlined like history that you did not. You have not dominated, just like multicultural history. Multicultural history is about this narrative, but the problem is that multicultural is still operating on the Confederate narrative in a way. So we're not getting galvanized around that unified messaging, which is what the Confederates are doing. But the fact is that we just didn't believe that they would shoot grenade wood, that there would be ICE agents in the streets. We would be, going and snatching the duo. We would be basically blowing up NATO. We would be bombing Iran. We would be bombing Nigeria. We didn't know that. Like, if you said this, I mean, literally, it's still not 365 days. That's tomorrow. And because it's not 365 days, right? And if I told you this last year, you wouldn't believe that all this would happen. You have Marlon come on, bro. This is not true. And that's literally the facts. So it wasn't that the messaging was wrong, it's just that nobody could truly imagine that we would be in this situation today. So that's why I'm going to say Kamala Harris' name. Nothing that I need her to be president. We should have a robust primary and whoever wins, wins. I don't care. But right now, by not holding up what she said, when they're saying that she was wrong, we're not proud of what she said. But she was completely right. There's nothing different that needs to be said. Maybe in fact, she needs to be more pointed. She needs to be more accurate in what she said last year during the campaign. Not last year, year before last time. It's flying when you're not having fun. And this, I'm not saying that we're reinforcing a narrative, we're running away from her. Because her narrative was right when we're wrong, nobody believes. I think 6 months ago, if you said that the opposite would be where it is today, you would not believe. I mean, come on, let's keep it real. And in all honesty, right now, I have been, talking to a lot of people, having conversations with a lot of my friends, my cousins and whatnot. And I can see the change in their voice. Now they're talking more like me, but when I was saying it a year or two ago, to be honest, I've been saying this. When you see the history, it's very clear actually that's what happened. I knew that they were not playing. If they got power, this would have eventually happened. I know the details, how it would happen, and but I tell you, it's AID, right, which is like 1%. They say that it's that the reason why they don't want healthcare is because Democrats are trying to give illegal immigrants healthcare, but if you look at the numbers, it's like 1% of all this healthcare fees goes to 1%. That's 99% accuracy on American citizens getting the healthcare. You can't apply for benefits unless you're a citizen. But look at all these topsy-turvy things we're not even talking about. And that is the magic. So by the time you stop talking about it, guess what? It goes out of history. So I'm really in it. I'm missing it, y'all. With this podcast, because there's just so much going on. Everybody, I get finished with this podcast. I love things. So now, I have like 2 more videos. And they said we want more, yes. But this next video, they're going to actually use a Bible verse. And I think this is because obviously Christianity is being hijacked. And that's the source of it. You know, if we deprogram and go back to the church and the church and stuff, that my people are in the Bible. science does matter. In the end of the day, these data points do matter. Critical race theory that we talked about earlier, the facts are the facts. You can't change that. How much you lie, X are X, the economy on good. My brothers and sisters, they were able to tell us, do you know that when Biden, this time last year, our economy was the envy of the world? Yes, it was tough. It was tough. It was completely tough. I mean, it wasn't that, but it was because of COVID. It was Democrats. They couldn't manage. Okay, that's the criticism of the messaging, I guess, of the Democrats, was that the messaging was, they didn't say COVID inflation. It just said everything was fine when the whole world was recovering from COVID, but America, apparently. When we were recovering, we achieved something that was amazing, called the soft landing. These are not getting out there going after Powell, poor guy. You see the prison, like the prison hostage videos, the other day, because they're suing and they're going after the tissue change. Everything is topsy-turvy. So Kamala Harris, you were right. And I want to say you were right because and we were fooled. But I mean, a lot of people in the middle, immigrants that voted for it now, oh, they wasn't going to do that. This is America. We're not really proud of people. Now you see what African Americans have been saying. If you knew our history, maybe we would have done it. If white people had really, and I want to say, like, I still say, like, I mean, all white people had really understood that when we're talking that we were suffering and we needed help and we needed, yeah, well, you know, just wait. You got to buy into white supremacy. When you don't teach Boston Public School history, the desegregation of Boston Public Schools and Boston Public Schools, you are complicit. You can't stay Jews. You're really going to have to understand what's going on. Okay, I've gone on another one. Please forgive me. It's just, you know, it's a lot. You got to know what to do.
That we're having our country stolen from us. That there's a deep state conspiracy to replace the voting populace with other people who aren't from here. So we have to drain the swamp. to keep America Christian. I heard this stuff at my time when I went to Turning Point USA's America Fest. I mean, it was blatant. It was all over the freaking place. You couldn't miss it. And by the way, if that sounds familiar, that's because the KKK said the same stuff in the 80s. This is nothing new in exact rhetoric. But Josh is going to try and make it seem like people who see it this way, we could say that all bias, including Josh. But my God, it's not like there isn't good data or evidence to support it, whether it's mass incarceration, even in my own state in New Jersey, that New Jersey state troopers are pulling over people of claims compared to white morality and critical theory are actually really useful tools in hierarchical societies. And make no mistake, Josh Heide, where him and his people are at the top, submit, believe is God-given. Wild.
You are not interested in justice. Biblical analogy.
So sorry, I'm pausing a lot. Keep going.
Where there was a claimed sexual assault, and and she's like, he tried to rape me. You don't know who the victim of the investigation.
Okay. Do you? This is very classic. Thread here. As an objective person who wants the facts while ignoring all of the actual facts, ties it into has ordained the government. Right now, of course, we know Biden's America, it wouldn't be that, but it's Trump's America, and Josh Howard alerting the government. Now, we all make sure that we point out that activists are critical. Huge buzzword, right, for his audience. And now we're going to tie education. And what we're going to do is we're going to take Hebrew Bible of Joseph and Potiphar, which, by the way, the story goes, tried to sleep with Joseph, claimed that he SA'd her, and then Joseph was thrown in prison for didn't commit. That's the general thought. But does Josh know that we have video? If he's trying to compare that story in the Hebrew Bible to terrible thing, it's apples and oranges. For example, in this case of Renee, we have tons of it. We don't need to debate the look at was churning her wheel. We can look at all of that, right? But Josh, like me, people like you, are just jumping to conclusions, that rushing to side with the oppressed, and the oppressed can do no wrong. But no one intersectionality is more oppressed you are, quote unquote, the more perfect you are. No one thinks that. It's just an acknowledgement of how society's structures are organized and who gets to sit on top and benefit from their privilege and who doesn't. But Josh Howard and his wife, they give his audience justification for why they should believe him and that, and not everything else that we've seen up until this point regarding the footage. And this person speaks to tens of thousands of people every single position, a truth teller, truth of either God's word or the truth about reality, the truth about politics. That's why this stuff is so dangerous, because brainwashed to believe things that don't exist in reality. And also, it was Trump and Kristi Noem who jumped to conclusions. For me, who saw all the footage. Just saying.
Potiphar's wife to be the victim, but Joseph actually was of a false allegation. So we need to be people like, we care about justice. We de-emotionalize. We're not going to know what actually happened.
Oh, okay. What about January 6th, buddy? I mean, come on. It's absurd, guys. It's absurd. It's absurd.
I mean, minorities, there will be more black and brown people in America and white people, and they know this. So in order to counter this, they're they are teaching population. And I've been very clear, population control is Americanism around by. Like the area was formed, the colony of the United States formed to transport Americans, because there were too many of us, right? Congress actually allocated money to send African Americans back to Africa, and then that's why you have that miracle right there. I think about 12,000 were able to go back, right, to Africa. This is the sterilizations, like the forced sterilizations, like Fannie Lou Hamer, right? This is America control the population of African Americans because they feel they can, when you feel you're God, you can. And so this leads me to my last clip. I feel like the montage went and this is my last clip. And this one is from Paul Lance, and he's a white guy. And he's like reads from himself, and he has a message for, I want to say white Americans, but it's really for, because I don't think there's a 33% that there's nothing else you can do. This has to be about deprogramming, like, and not allowing this minority to narrative of today. So let us watch that.
What have we become here? This isn't us. How did we let this happen?
This is who we've always been. This country has never been great for everybody. It was designed to benefit white people, specifically 21-year-old land-owning white men. Period. Hard stop. And every demographic or gender outside of that has had to fight against the white man just to be equal. Go back to the Middle Passage. 1.4 million black people died on ships. Segregation, Jim Crow, women's suffrage movement, Asians in internment camps. We murdered millions of Native Americans and just took their land. We started a war with Mexico and took that land. All we've done as a white people, we're like locusts. We take and we take and we take and we take. That's what you're seeing right now. A white man taking Venezuela. A white man taking Greenland. A white man probably going after Colombia. Let's be sixth. A white man lied about an election because he didn't like the results. White people went to the U.S. Capitol and beat officers. 5 of them died after that day. 4 from PTSD, and Officer Sitnik died from his injuries. Had heart attacks, crushed vertebrae, PTSD. The entire world saw it. And this country said back in power. The rapist, the child molester, the convicted felon, the pedophile, the man who cheats on his wife with the porn star, the guy who asked for the execution of 5 black men, grabbed women by the pussy, grabbed them by the blah, 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 calling women piggy, calling them fat, calling them ugly, telling 30,000 lies, having dinner with Nick Fuentes. And white people in a majority said, this is really hard. It's either that, the guy that talks about Hannibal Lecter and electric sharks and how windmills cause cancer, who stares at the sun without sunglasses, or the black woman, the most qualified candidate in the history of our country. And this country voted like it always does for the most morally bankrupt, unqualified white man just because he's white.
I think it's fine. So, anyway, let me see. I don't know, cut the podcast short.